good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Jay from TechForce, founder of TechForce. TechForce is a cybersecurity services company, and we are focused on, uh, education sector, right? So today's webinar is about building a cyber resilient school. As you can see, it says April because we have done a presentation to like 100 schools back in April, and we are using the same presentation as the information hasn't changed much, right? So resilience, cyber resilience, just resilience as it, what does it stand for? Your preparedness for the unwanted events in life and how quickly we can react and recover. And cyber is same, it's just a cyber events, right? So effectively, your organization preparation and effectively respond to and recover from the cyber attacks, right? So in the education sector, especially in the UK, education sector is the most targeted sector in the UK, right? As per the UK Breaches Survey in 2024. And as you can see, the stats there. So primary schools, well, we can ignore the primary schools for now, and then let's look at from secondary schools and the businesses. 50% of all the businesses have been breached, and then secondary schools, 71%. And if you look at the higher education institutions, pretty much every education institution was breached. And that's 3 in 4 in secondary schools and 4 out of 4 in higher education. And some of the attack vectors here, as you can see, the phishing attacks are highest on average 90 to 95% across the different sectors. And then you can see various others as well, right? So I'm sure my colleague Brian will take you into much deeper details in just a few minutes. But what are the challenges addressing these cyber resilience in education sector, especially schools and colleges and higher education, or the limited budgets? And especially with the new government coming in, the budgets are even more tighter, and then the impending VAT and whatnot, the new regulations. And with that, the budgets are even more, they're squeezing the budgets, right? The awareness piece, when we presented this same presentation to 100 schools back in April, out of 100 schools, just 3 schools have the Cyber Essentials basic certification. That's 97% of the schools don't have a basic certification, and Cyber Essentials Plus, nothing at all. As the certification name itself suggests, it's just a basic essential certification, and only 3 schools have it. And almost 60% of the attendees at the conference don't even never heard of Cyber Essentials. It just goes to show the awareness piece in the education sector is low as well. And adding to that, the skills available internally with the schools. Most schools are managed by an IT company. Most schools' IT environment is managed by an IT company or internal resource, but internal resource are very limited. So, or the skills available internally are limited. These are the predominantly 3 biggest challenges. And what can you do? I'm sure, as I said, Brian will dig deeper in a few minutes, but these are the low-hanging fruit, as we say, or staff training, access controls, security baselines, password policies, and external monitoring, internal and external monitoring, which may be slightly advanced, but the rest of them are low-hanging fruit. You train your staff, which would increase the awareness and grow a security culture, because security is everybody's responsibility, right? Not just the IT teams or senior managements. Achieving the baselines like Cyber Essentials or even further, we were working with a school where the school was trying to achieve ISO 27001, which may be extreme, but achieving baselines is a good starting point, right? Regular audits like maturity assessments and cloud security assessments. Almost pretty much every school is using either Office 365 or G Cloud. So assessments would be a good starting point, right? These are the ideal roadmap we would suggest for a school. I won't bore you with all the every single step here, but this is how we work with the different schools, right? what we try to achieve in 0 to 6 months, 6 to 12, and 12 to 36 months, and so on and so forth. And some of the schools we worked with, this was 4 months ago, but now the number of schools we're working with is vastly increased ever since that presentation, right? And some of the packages we have, I'm sure we can discuss that at a later stage or after the webinar. But that's me, Jay from TechForce, and I will hand it over to Brian from Arctic Wolf.
All right. Thanks, Jay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
Yep, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, got you.
Yeah, okay, so let's kind of hone in on some of the stuff that Jay kind of showed there in terms of stats and what those actually are made up of, and then how we can help. So my name's Brian Stewart. I'm a pre-sales technical person for Arctic Wolf, covering Scotland, working with Murray Thorne, who's also on the call, who's on the commercial side. My brief background, Arctic Wolf for about 2 years, and before that I've worked for a whole bunch of vendors in the industry with elements of cybersecurity, data management, virtualization, software defined, all that good stuff for a period spanning back to 2005 in terms of vendors, and before that working for resellers in Scotland also. So first of all, Arctic Wolf, who are we? So we have global scale. We are a large organization in terms of customer count in the cybersecurity industry. We look after cybersecurity for over 6,000 customers. We are very cybersecurity professional heavy. We have over 700 security engineers plus other analysts and platform engineers, taking the count of technical security people to over 1,000. Our platform, our cloud platform, processes over 6 trillion events per week. That doesn't really mean anything to you at this point. It just shows the kind of scale that we're operating on, and that in itself is useful to have. It gives safety in numbers because we see threats across the globe, across all kinds of customers, and we can work to update our detection logic based on that data that we see. We also have an incident response arm, and these are incident response specialists, very seasoned people working with customers that maybe don't have Arctic Wolf's proactive services to do things like managed detection response and so on. But there are customers that have had a major breach and they've gone in on a Monday morning and seen the blue screen with the ransom demand on it. Major breach. Who do they go to for help? They can phone Arctic Wolf Incident Response, and we help them. Now that's a team of over 100 people specialised in major breaches, and they're working over 1,000 incident response cases a year. Again, that's a nice feedback loop for us in terms of threat intelligence and the up to the moment tactics, techniques and procedures being used by cyber criminals, and again helps our detection logic to spot these things in customer environments who we are monitoring the security telemetry for. Don't just take our word for it of how good we are. Arctic Wolf is definitely an industry leader when it comes to having a security operations partner. But analysts like IDC confirm this view, 2 times a leader in the marketscape that they produce. If you look at customer review portals like Gartner's Peer Insights, we are 4.8, 4.9 out of 5 there. Customers speak very highly of us. We've won various industry accolades and awards, and we have ISO 27001 and SOC 2 Type 2 certifications for our operation and the service that we provide. So yeah, to set the scene, kind of coming into what Jay was talking about there. So this is an ever-growing industry, right? It's a very lucrative industry for the cyber criminals involved, and if we trend that back, it just gets bigger and bigger. $10.3 billion of losses in 2022, increased to $12.5 billion in 2023. And this year, total security spend is going to be in excess of $188 billion, which is, a big year-over-year spend increase. But really what we're dealing with is almost a negative return on investment. People are spending all this money in security products and tooling, when that's not really where the problem lies. This is showing this effectiveness gap. Sorry, was that a question, guys? I'm getting some audio. No, good. Okay, yeah, just setting the scene. So there is an effectiveness gap here, right? Increased spend, but cyber crime continues to rise. So what gives? What's the real problem? It's not the products or tools. In terms of overall numbers, cybercrime's an $8 trillion industry, and looking at some of the highest or most used attack vectors like ransomware and business email compromise, they're $30 billion and $26 billion industries in their own right. And again, this is only growing year over year. But to come back to Jay's stats, what's the risk specifically in education, to the title of today's webinar, Building a Cyber Resilient School? Well, the education sector is a vulnerable target, and it's partly because educational establishments typically have a small IT team, and those people are run ragged, trying to keep the lights on, dealing with day-to-day operational stuff, and don't really have much opportunity or spare resource to be proactive about cybersecurity. Now, what does that translate into? Well, if you look at some of the UK stats, like those from the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, DSIT, the education sector is more likely to have experienced a breach than the average UK business in the last 12 months. Now, primary schools are relatively close to the typical average business in terms of how many identify breaches or attacks. Or it's a flip of a coin, really. It's half of them have, half of them haven't in the last year. And all other types of education institutions are more likely to have identified a cybersecurity breach in the last 12 months than the average UK business. 71% of secondary schools identified a breach or attack in the last year. 86% of further education colleges identified a breach or attack in the last year. And the mind-boggling stat for me, and Jay showed this earlier in summary, higher education institutions are much more likely to be affected by cyber attacks. 97% identified a breach or attack in the last year, and 6 out of 10 of those higher education establishments identified that they've been negatively impacted by a breach. So systems down, systems unavailable, ransom demands, etc. Okay, so what are we up against in terms of attack types? So if we look at Arctic's incident response arm that I mentioned earlier, in those 1,000 odd cases that they're working per year, nearly half of them are ransomware incidents or some sort of data extortion event. And then about 30%, approaching a third, is business email compromise type attacks, and then about 15% or some sort of network intrusion. So let's pick on business email compromise just to hone in a bit further, get to an extra level of detail. And the reason for picking this one is that business email compromise criminal activities generate the second most revenue for threat actor groups. The largest revenue driver is actually crypto scams, and things like ransomware are quite far down the list in terms of total revenue generated. So business email compromise accounted for over a quarter of his incident response cases last year. Why is that? Well, the scams work. They're easy to execute. It's quite a low barrier of entry to do that kind of attack for a cyber criminal. And across different industries, seeing business email compromise, education is right up there, kind of top 3 in terms of who experiences that kind of breach. If we look at the root causes, looking beyond business email compromise, some of the root causes are heavily weighted towards external exposure type attacks. About a quarter is to do with user action that results in a breach. And then the other stuff is kind of small percentages by comparison. So if we kind of hone in the top 2, looking at external exposure particularly, nearly 40% of that is some sort of external remote access. So remote desktop protocol being allowed through firewalls in some way, or VPNs being compromised in some way. And about a quarter of external exposure kind of root causes in terms of resulting in a breach are known vulnerabilities. Right, so that's kind of incredible in itself, because it's a major attack vector, and known vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities that have a published CVE for a period of time, and they're something that you could have known about and done something about in terms of patching systems up to date, so operating system patch levels, application patch levels, which would protect you from that kind of breach. If we look at user actions specifically, within that, around 10% of it is phishing emails that someone's clicked on something they shouldn't have and maybe had their credentials harvested or money extorted in some other way through that kind of attack. 7.3% previously compromised credentials. So this is information available on the dark web for cyber criminals to buy. Corporate credentials can be with plain text passwords, and they might have a high value user in your organization identified as someone that maybe makes procurement requests. And if they've got access to that mailbox, they can send an email that looks like a genuine purchase request payment type email and insert their bank account details into there. And that's how money can be extorted from organizations through that kind of attack. Around 6% is malicious software downloads, but again, that's kind of users clicking on things that they shouldn't, right? We then look at the top vulnerabilities and the tactics, techniques, and procedures in use by the bad guys. Over half of incidents actually involved only one of 10 specific vulnerabilities, and a quarter of those were used in, or 3 of those 10 vulnerabilities were used in over a quarter of intrusions, and those are the top ones there with the published CVE numbers. So the move it transfer vulnerability, the manage engine vulnerabilities, it's been going on a little while now, but not that old. And then much older is Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities still being exploited in the wild. Now, personally, I speak to a lot of customers or would-be customers every week. The vast majority are using O365 now, but there's obviously still some Microsoft Exchange out there that's being heavily targeted and breached to kind of weight this heavily in these stats. Now, 60%, pretty astonishingly, 60% of incidents leveraged a vulnerability that was assigned a CVE, so a published vulnerability kind of record prior to 2023. So a year or 2 years plus old. So you'd think that was a reasonable amount of time for an organization to realize that they had that vulnerability in their environment and then to get those affected systems patched and protect themselves from it. In terms of tactics, techniques, and procedures to watch, so common kind of things that the bad guys do, they make use of command and scripting interpreters like PowerShell. So if you're monitoring for that, it can be useful. They use ingress tool transfers. They use WMI type attacks. They do things like obfuscating files, if I can get that word out, to hide what they're doing. So as part of a detection logic, you really want to be looking for obfuscated words or terms or values and strings in that monitoring. And they're also doing things like SEO poisoning, so search engine optimization poisoning. So you do a Google search and you get the kind of top hits. It might be AdWords type hits. And it looks like the website that you're looking for. And when you go into that link, it looks valid and it's got the login and you put in your username and password, and that's your credentials getting harvested at that point. And then it's from that kind of harvesting that packs of credentials are available for purchase on the dark web, and that's what some cyber criminals will use as a kind of gold mine and way to target individuals that are high value users in organizations. So in terms of how we manage and mitigate these threats, so this is the kind of headlines, and it's related to what Jay showed as well. So recommendations for building a cyber resilient school: you should develop a solid understanding of your overall attack surface. So you need to be monitoring across the cyber attack surface, not just focused on a tool set that's only a part of your attack surface, like an endpoint, for example. Your attack surface is much wider than that across network, cloud, identity, authentication, etc., etc. You want to employ a zero trust security strategy. You want to ensure your broad visibility into your environment and assets, so you're shining a light on everything that you've got in your environment and any vulnerabilities therein. You want to take control of the clouds. Everyone loves public cloud from the agility point of view. It's quick and easy to deploy things into public cloud, but to do it in a security best practice manner is something altogether tougher. You want to enforce strong identity controls, so things like multi-factor authentication, even password policies. And you want to establish a culture of security in your organization. And that is to do with really educating your end users in good cybersecurity hygiene, right? Being able to spot the phishing email, the strange kind of urgency in the body text, the strange URL that's hiding behind another URL that's pretending to be, and that's all about cybersecurity training of your end users. Now, getting to AI specifically and how it's used by criminals, and AI is very topical. There's not a vendor out there that doesn't have some sort of AI story now. It's used for companies to kind of shore up their share price almost in some cases. They want to be a Me Too and say they've got an AI story. AI has been used by cybersecurity vendors like Arctic Wolf for a long time. We don't, we've not kind of extolled the virtues of it. We think it has its place, right? To the start of the presentation, we're processing over 6 trillion security events for customers. There's not enough cybersecurity experts in the world in terms of human resource to process that sheer number of events. You need a good way to sift through that, looking for the needle in the haystack almost, right? So we use AI and machine learning to sift through all of that telemetry data and apply custom rule sets and indicators of compromised data from threat intelligence feeds and such like, which helps us to streamline the amount of stuff that needs investigating in our SOC by human expertise. And these are very tenured cybersecurity people that we employ that need to understand the whole cyber attack surface and not just be experts in one tool. So what does AI look like in cybercrime? So it facilitates sophisticated cybercrime. It makes it more accessible to more people. It can automate sophisticated attack types, and it's led to new types of crime emerging, phishing and stuff like that, and deep fake voice type scams and these kind of things. If we view AI as a cyber arms race when it comes to cybersecurity, this is how it looks really. It's all about trying to keep up with the bad guys because they're always inventing new ways to extort money from organizations, right? So if we come to battle with a baton, they bring out a pistol. We bring a pistol, they bring, an automatic pistol. We get one of those, they come with a submachine gun or a rifle. We get one of those, they come with a bazooka, right? So if you look at that from the point of view of the goodies, how we can use AI to help in the fight against cybercrime, it helps us to understand patterns in security telemetry, as I've just talked about. It helps with things like user behavior analytics, the baseline user behavior, and then look for deviations from the norm. Helps with automation, like we're using it in our SOC to sift through all the telemetry, and it enables scale, right? As I said, also we're dealing with 6,000 odd customers globally, and we need that kind of AI machine learning automation that goes with that to handle that sheer amount of data, look after that many customers effectively. But if we look at the baddie side of the equation, AI helps them. It makes the barrier of entry lower, right? So things like generative AI helps to write or offer credible social engineering type attacks. There's no more English in emails and those kind of phishing attacks. They're well formatted. They can even have kind of regional dialect in them based on using generative AI to help with that. It can help the bad guys scan and expose vulnerabilities at scale. It's very easy for them to mass scan, different port ranges, protocols that might be in use across your environment through your externally facing assets first and foremost. But if they have a way in, can help them to find what's vulnerable as well. And it makes it much easier for cyber criminals to write malicious code that's harder to detect and to iterate that code slightly so that it's undetectable from previous detection logic and things like endpoint software and so on. So yeah, the cost for the good guys, the barrier of entry goes up, right? Because you need to spend a lot of money to enable AI to be able to help you. For the bad guys, it makes the barrier of entry lower because they can get started with business email compromise, writing a phishing email very effectively and cost effectively using generative AI tools like that. If we kind of look at things from the attacker's perspective, this is the MITRE attack framework, if in a very kind of high-level simplified view. Across the three main attack types of ransomware, data breaches, and business email compromise, the bad guys look at your environment as a series of dominoes to topple, right? They want to gain access. They want to establish persistence. They want to elevate permissions, kind of moving adjacent different accounts and looking for ones that have access to things that might be valuable. And then they will leverage that access, and through establishing persistence, they might create some sort of jump host or way command and control beaconing server, link to the dark web. And then to leverage that access, the kind of final dominoes to topple are how they monetize your environment, right? So when it comes to ransomware, when they are in your environment, and if you look at analysts like Gartner, the bad guys are doing this kind of low-key reconnaissance in your environment, going unnoticed, undetected for on average 6 months. So, they could already be in, they're doing this kind of work, they're doing their homework, they're identifying what the crown jewels are in your environment in terms of valuable data to you. And that's what they'll then exfiltrate, they'll upload to an anonymous FTP or something like that, and then they'll encrypt it right in your environment, and they'll demand a ransom for the decryption key, and they'll give you a sample of the stuff they've exfiltrated and threaten to make it publicly available in some way. And that's how it's done, right? That's how ransomware kind of extorts money from organizations, and crypto is a part of that for how they get their kind of anonymized payments. Now, if you look at the costs to do with that, when it comes to a breach, a lot of the costs are well known, right? But there's a lot of unknown costs as well. So this is a Deloitte study. A lot of the cost is beneath the surface, the less known stuff. 95% of costs are the less known stuff. So what does that look like? Well, the stuff at the top you'll be familiar with, right? Forensics, incident response, restoration, recovery, and such like. The lesser known costs of the actual ransom payment, if you've been ransomware, any related lawsuits or data mining that has to be done to recover or to prove what's been touched and what's not. Credit monitoring could be for breached employees, for example, might have credit monitoring needs to do with that. And down to that line, that dotted line in orange there is where your cyber insurance coverage will typically end. There's all these costs below that that can be very, amount to a lot of money, right? So revenue downtime, wasted payroll, loss of future revenues. And this can be, especially from an educational perspective and a schools perspective, this can be reputational damage. When we talk to schools and educational establishments, that's normally what they're most fearful of, is the reputational damage that comes with a publicly exposed breach, and what that might look like in terms of reduced pupil or student numbers and loss of revenues there, which has an operational impact to cash flow. And if you've got cyber insurance, it may mean increased premiums if you don't do something drastic to improve the situation and prove that you're less of a risk to the cyber insurer going forward. So how do you reduce cyber risk? Well, it's our opinion that it takes not just technology. To the point at the start, it's not really about buying the latest security tools or products, right? That's not working, that's not effective. You need extraordinary talent to help you end cyber risk, right? And that's part of addressing risk in totality, as you can see here. You've got the risk mitigation side of things, but in order to mitigate risk, you really need to understand it first and foremost. So as part of our typical service, right, you subscribe to us, we become your security operations partner. Our core service is managed detection and response, but that's across the cyber attack surface, not just focused on one area of your cyber attack surface. But we do a risk assessment. And that's based on industry frameworks that the insurers look to and so on as well. So typically it might be the CIS framework, critical security controls, that we'll do as part of that assessment to establish what your posture looks like on day one as you join our service, and then map out a security journey with you to improve your posture over time by addressing specific areas. Things like your Active Directory configuration, hardening that. Why are those users in the admin group, for example, or why is that vulnerability still in existence? Same with firewall configuration. Why are those IP ranges open? Are those protocols? So really look at all that stuff programmatically with you as part of a security journey and track that according to the framework, right? It can be CIS, it can be NIST 1.1 or 2.0 as well in the cyber resilience assessment in a way that we track your posture over time. And that can be used as a proof point to help you prove things internally. It might be to your board, or it might be to cyber insurers, for example. And actually, incidentally, Arctic Wolf, we're told by customers we typically reduce their premiums for cyber insurance between a quarter and a third. And that's just because we're a well-known entity. We have this way of proving things effectively to insurers so that they understand the risk level of who they're then insuring. So yeah, a big part of it is the talent. We have our own technology, our cloud platform, which I'll kind of talk a little about in a moment. But these things go hand in hand, right? You don't kind of buy a bunch of tools and then bolt on some people as a service. That isn't that effective. There's many small managed security services partners doing that kind of approach. It's not the most effective. And you don't kind of have a service and then try to manage everyone else's tools that they've got for them. The way to do it is to have those two things integrated, and Arctic Wolf has been integrated from day one. We use our technology to enable our people to monitor your environment and to be able to understand any threats, to be able to contain those threats, and then give you remediation guidance around all of that as well. Now, there is a small aspect of risk transfer still when it comes to how you address cyber risk overall, and there's two aspects to risk transfer, right? There's insurance, so cyber insurance. We view that as having a place to give you some coverage, but also warranty. So Arctic Wolf does have a security operations warranty. So if you partner with us as your security operations partner, your warranty will be anywhere from $100,000 to $1.5 million, depending on which services you subscribe to and for how long you subscribe. Now, a warranty like that is really us putting our money where our mouth is, right? And saying, you know, if you take our services, you're much less likely to have a breach. Your risk is lowered. And for anything that does get through, the impact will be much lower because it's all about early detection and response. And us monitoring your whole cyber attack surface helps with that. That warranty can be used to pay for things like incident response services for a major breach if it was to occur, and it can also be used for things like cyber insurance premium excesses. So how do we do it? Well, we have this cloud platform, and it is an open XDR platform. We're vendor neutral. We ingest from the most well-known security products and tool sets out there across endpoint, network, cloud, identity. And that lets us get a really broad view of what's going on. So you've already invested in all this security tooling. We're not asking you to rip and replace that. We're saying point all that telemetry at us, and we'll do the clever interpretation of it to work out if there's a threat in your environment, if that needs contained, and what remediation needs to happen. And at its core, that's our managed detection response service as your security operations partner. Now, that's really, from what I've talked about so far, very much reactive, right? The 24/7 and 365 SOC monitoring and coverage there. And we actually have something called the concierge delivery model and how we deliver this service to you, which doesn't just have a reactive side, it also has that proactive side, which, as I talked about, begins with that cyber resilience assessment and work with you. So we assign a pod of security engineers to work with you in business hours around improving your posture over time and being able to prove what kind of risk you are to cyber insurers and internally and so on. So that's the two parts to that, and the security journey is a key part of how we kind of address cyber risk as part of that concierge delivery model. The other subscription services that we have are managed risk, which is helping you with your vulnerability management to shine a light on everything you have in your environment, so all your devices, even your non-standard OS devices, things like connected photocopiers, IoT devices, etc. Things that might have an old firmware on them that's got a known vulnerability that could be used to to, beacon to a command and control server on the dark web, we can kind of scan for that internally as well as scanning your external vulnerabilities, and help you to contextualize everything that shows up, to prioritize it in terms of what you should patch first, and then to prove that you've got a handle on your vulnerabilities and you're addressing your risk from a patch management, vulnerability management point of view. As we talked about, you also want to educate your end users in good cybersecurity hygiene, and that's where our managed security awareness subscription service can also come in. We also have incident response services, as I said, and that's completely separate to these proactive services that I've talked about. Working with a valued partner as TechForce are, they have services wrapped around incident response and can help you here with something we call our Jumpstart retainer. And that is a way to have an incident response plan that is dynamic and can be updated for as long as you subscribe to that, but store that plan in a secure portal essentially, along with any other documents like backup and recovery kind of process and such like, that would allow you to resume business operations in the event of a major breach. Probably worth also mentioning, we have unlimited data ingestion. We don't price on logs per second or events per second or a number of sources that we're ingesting, because we feel that's the wrong way to go about things, right? You don't want to be in the situation of choosing your favourite child to send to university or to private school because you think they're going to do the best, right? We want you to send everything to us. We'll work out whether that telemetry is important or not, rather than you having to pick and choose because you're afraid of the commercial implications. So relating that back to building a cyber resilient skill, so develop a solid understanding of your overall attack surface. That's about that broad visibility and ingestion from across the cyber attack surface. Broad visibility into your environment and assets. That's to do with managed risk vulnerability scanning. We can help there. Enforcing strong identity controls, employing a zero trust security strategy. These are things that we can help you with that proactive side of our service, to look at these things, review them, and help you make improvements. Taking control of the cloud, again, that's part and parcel of our managed detection response service and our managed risk service, to understand how you're configured in the cloud and any improvements that might need to be made, and helping you establish in a culture of security. That's all about educating those end users, right, in good cybersecurity hygiene. So going back to this kind of MITRE ATT&CK view of the world across the major attack types, we reduce your risk of a cyber attack major breach by over 90%, and this has been validated by different analysts. This is based on a Forrester study on the value of Arctic growth and the impact that we have, and we actually reduced the figures from over 90% to be really conservative, right, and kind of easier to believe and digest. But a big part of that is that educating your end users through managed security awareness, and the lion's share of kind of proactively reducing risk is having a handle on those vulnerabilities. And that's what we give you with our managed risk vulnerability management service. Now, for something that does get through those lines of defence, we, again, according to the analysts, reduce the impact of those minor breaches or minor incidents by over 90%. And that's because our managed detection response service picks up on things so early because of our extensive monitoring of your environment. So that stat on Gartner, or the bad guys in your environment, for over 6 months, that time is reduced with our service to 30 minutes or less. And that's not just us picking up an alert and throwing it over the fence to our customer. That's not it at all. That's our platform finding something suspicious, or that being escalated inside our SOC to our SOC triage board, where human expertise gets involved. They look at what's been flagged by the platform, they look at adjacent telemetry and log sources, they verify that that threat's real, they can optionally contain at that point, and there's a few different methods we have for containment, and then we reach out proactively to the customer saying, here's what we found, it's definitely real, here's the steps that we need to take to fix it, and we've contained to stop it spreading. That's what we do in 30 minutes or less, and in fact our current stat is actually 23 minutes on average. So 6 months to 30 minutes or less, or 23 minutes on average, is quite an incredible improvement, and that's how you can see that over 90% reduced impact if you have our managed detection response service. Now further down the line, I mean, the dirty little secret in cybersecurity is you can't stop everything, right? So some things might still get through, and that's where things like the incident response jumpstart retainer comes in, to have a plan for a breach, what you do, how you react. Even just Arctic Wolf incident response services, understanding the lay of the land in your environment. What are your key business systems? What order do they need to be brought back up in if you're doing restoration and such, like who to escalate to, who your legal counsel is, who your cyber insurer is. That would all be encapsulated in that kind of plan. And then our warranty comes into effect as well to help you pay for those kind of services if something did get through to that level. So in summary, tools aren't the problem. You really need to switch your thinking from a tools mindset to more of an operational mindset, and Arctic Wolf wants to be your security operations partner. And we make that switch by unifying your security tech stack, by giving you that overarching overlay at the top level, ingesting all of your security product tools, telemetry. We focus on the outcomes with this kind of human expertise, helping you to proactively improve your posture over time. And we help you to build resilience over time because of that. Thank you very much, guys. That's all I had. Any questions?